right, welcome back. This is part 2 of the two-part lecture about Bernini and Borromini. This lecture we're going to cover Borromini, but before that we're going to talk about the rivalry between these two very famous Italian architects. So these were two very different kinds of men, but they were both sort of vying for the same gigs because Rome was a small place and the people with power were the ones giving out the architectural commissions. So Bernini saw architecture as a staging and experience, and he used theatricality and drama in his design to heighten the visitor's emotional and spiritual response. Borromini, on the other hand, stretched the limits of classical architecture that had made a revival during the Renaissance by distorting all of these classical elements, and he created these dynamic sculptural spaces. Bernini was a skilled courtier, and he was well loved and very popular and famous and fun at parties. Borromini was a misunderstood artistic genius and a loner. The rivalry started when all the work that Borromini did on St. Peter's went unacknowledged, and Bernini got all the credit for the innovative design. Like I said earlier, he was involved even with that baldacchino that we looked at. The artists fought over commissions. There's this very interesting story, and it actually seems like it could be true, but here's the story. Bernini lived in like a palace studio next to Borromini, and Borromini couldn't resist the temptation of mocking his rival, and so he had a pair of donkey ears carved onto the side of the building that was facing Bernini's studio in a way of calling him a jackass. Bernini responded with equal wit and maturity by sculpting a phallus on the side of his house, pointing towards Borromini and his team. And these sculptures are no longer visible, as they were considered indecent and removed. But there are many different corroborating witnesses to this actually being factual. Okay, so they hated each other, they were competitive. One was really charismatic and people loved him. The other was this brooding, loner guy. Bernini lived a rich, long life. Borromini, sadly, committed suicide. Not sure why, but there it is. So there's this story about this fountain that Bernini built in front of a church that Borromini built. And you can see by the dates that the fountain was made before the church. So if you go to Rome and someone gives you a tour and you're in the Piazza Navona where these two amazing structures are located, they'll tell you that Borromini's church was so offensive to Bernini that Bernini made the sculpture look like the man was repulsed by it and turning away, and another person was hiding their head. The official explanation for the poses of these statues is that they represented the four rivers of the world, and one river, the source was unknown, and that's why it was hiding its head, and the other was the Rio de la Plata of the Americas, and the official explanation is that he's posing to show submission as the Americans had recently been colonized. So it doesn't really work out time frame wise because the fountain was first before the church. However, church commissions happen over a period of time, and so it is absolutely possible that it was known that Borromini was going to build a church in this spot, and Bernini knew it, so he was attempting to get ahead of it, make the gesture first, knowing that this church was on its way. So I'm going to call this legend or story plausible. Actually, it does seem possible that Bernini might have made this statue as a reaction to Borromini's church. Which, by the way, the church is amazing in itself. It has this wonderfully kind of weird rounded front entrance and these twin bell towers. But we'll talk about his other churches, which are a little bit more well known. Before we get to any Borromini churches, I want to talk about this forced perspective gallery at the Palazzo Spada that he made in 1632. So it's pretty early in his career. And what you're looking at is diminishing rows of columns and a rising floor that create a visual illusion of a gallery that's 121 feet long, but it's actually only 26 feet long. And then at the end of the gallery, it's supposed to look like a life-size sculpture, but in fact, that sculpture is only 2 feet high. And he got the help of a mathematician who did all the calculations to make this thing look as it does. And above this gallery, it's now not there anymore, but there was a poem inscribed, and the end line of the poem was, "The world grandeur is nothing but an illusion," thus making this a teaching tool for the Catholic Church. Because remember, all of this is in service of the Counter-Reformation, of the movement to either bring back followers or get new followers. And so all works of art, architecture, they were all meant to impress upon the viewers the power of the Catholic Church and how, and its role in your life, and how by not being a Catholic, you're actually gonna go to hell, even if you think you believe in some sort of Christianity. So they're looking to regain or get new followers, and they're doing things like this, which is this, you go visit this thing today and you're still blown away by how crazy and inventive it is. At the beginning of Borromini's career, he was given smaller commissions, like make that gallery, or I need a staircase, and I have this kind of weird space for it, so I need you to do something inventive with this space for the staircase. And so he came up with this helicoidal staircase. It follows the principle of turning on its rotational axis. And it's an oval, and ovals are important, and I will tell you why in a few minutes. But it was flattened longitudinally, so it provided easier ascent than staircases of a circular plan. So not only was this really weirdly innovative, but also it was easier to get up and down the stairs because of the ovoid shape of it. Each turn comprises 12 Doric double-twisted columns and capitals decorated with small bees. Remember, that's the Barberini's family's heraldic symbol. The main axis is 9.5 meters. The lesser axis is 7.85 meters. Light is shed through the oculus above. Oculus basically just means hole in the ceiling where the sun comes through. All of that is to say, he really had to come up with a bunch of different inventive ideas in order to make this. Spiral-shaped structures, with all the problems involved in their design, were particularly congenial to Borromini's eccentric spirit. He came up with them with several drawings and the architectural details of other works. And it's possible that this staircase, though designed by Borromini, was finished by Bernini, because Bernini made his own staircase for the Palazzo Barberini. And you can see this is not helicoidal or of an oval shape. It is square, and it also has the Doric columns, sets of 2, and it's a really nice stairway. We're talking about stairways. But there's something really kind of amazing about Borromini's as opposed to Bernini's. Bernini's is more practical, Borromini's was more out there. But also Borromini's had an ease to it because of the shape. It made it easier to walk up the stairs. Okay, here we see Borromini getting even more inventive and using things he learned from earlier works. This is a fascinating structure because the facade is actually inside a courtyard. You can't see this from the street. You have to go into a courtyard in order to see it. And the courtyard, or the facade of the thing, is concave, and it molds the church into the courtyard like it's completing it rather than disrupting it. And the facade looks like this continuation with the courtyard arches included in the front of it. Facade just means the front of the building. Except the openings are filled with small windows and a door and a larger glass window above the door. And above the facade is the large parapet structure that's convex, so it has this pushing out thing. And this creates a dynamic tension between upper and lower, and it creates this movement. It creates like a feeling of being pushed and pulled simultaneously. And that's something that Borromini does a lot. He really injects drama into his buildings. And remember why they keep doing this. They keep injecting drama into their works so that people are overwhelmed by the art. They're trying to really blow away the visitors, the viewers, etc. So above the facade, above the parapet structure, is the lantern. The lantern is that top thing of Sant' Ivo, and it's topped with this kind of spiral shape, and it's surmounted by a cross. And I don't know what's going on with that spiral shape, but I do know that in ancient Rome, you can find Trajan's Column. And Trajan's Column is a story of all of the battles or something that Trajan, a Roman emperor, engaged in. And you can actually, they had a building around it so you could walk around and read it. And this twisting, spiraling, column-like thing on top of this church might sort of call back to Trajan's column, which it was still standing at the time. It's still standing today. So Borromini definitely could have seen Trajan's column. The interior of Santivo is contrived of distinct shapes. There's a triangle in the dome, and then the three angles are cut as if they're bitten off, and then there are semicircles located in between the triangle's three lines. And Borromini utilized these curves and edges, semicircles, clipped triangle tips, in equal amounts to define the shape of the rotunda. The rotunda is just the big round room at the bottom. The blending of the edges and the curves is arguably Borromini's most distinguishable signature things. He's always messing with curves, angles, and trying to fit them together to create really interesting movements in his architecture. This church, San Carlo alla Quattro Fontane, or sometimes it's called San Carlino because it's a small church, I think is Borromini's masterpiece. The facade of the church is filled with sculpture, including a forward-leaning cartouche. The cartouche is that oval thing at the top, held high by angels. And the oval-shaped cartouche has a painting on it. It has faded, but it's still there. The facade was actually completed 2 decades after the interior of the church was designed. So he really focused on the interior of the church because this was also like a monastery or like a place where an order of Catholic priests lived. So they needed a place to live, so the facade was last. One of the reasons that Borromini had to be so inventive with this church is because it was on this really weird-shaped plot of land. It was on the corner. There were ancient fountains that he had to incorporate into the building, and that's why it's called the Four Fountains, the Quattro Fontane, because there's one on the corner, and then there's across the street, etc. So he had to work in older design elements, and this was not a very big space. The interior of the space is marked with an oval dome, and it has a honeycomb of receding crosses and polygons. That dome, the name of those sort of receding crosses and polygons, so it's like a coffered ceiling. And coffer is an architectural invention which allows you to build lighter and lighter. If you build a dome and you make it coffered, then that means that you can use less materials, and the dome can be bigger and lighter as it goes up. He uses a geometric approach instead of a traditional one. He believed in mathematics and the idea of nature and geometry as interconnected. He was a firm believer in having math solve your problems because math existed in nature. And the oval is an appropriate shape for the Baroque because, in contrast to the circle emphasized in the Renaissance or in the ancient Rome, which is regular and even and perfect in an ideal form, the oval is a more complicated figure in geometrical terms. And we talked a little bit about mannerism in the last lecture, but this is kind of a combination of those two ideas. Mannerism sort of wanted to break the rules, and they were rebelling against perfection, where in the Baroque they wanted to pay homage to those Renaissance artists, but they also liked the theatricality or the drama of mannerism. So they tried to sort of synthesize these two ideas. And so the oval was a perfect shape to do this. It's more complicated in geometrical terms than a circle. It's also more dynamic. And just as the Baroque valued complexity, eccentricity, and motion over balance and perfection. It might be difficult to tell, but the name of the group of priests that lived here were the Trinitarians. And the Trinity is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so there's this idea of the Holy Three. And what Borromini did is he took two triangles and connected them at the base, and then he created an oval out of those two triangles. So if you look at the architectural drawing on the left, and you look sort of right in the middle, there's a line that divides the dome, and that line ends in, if you follow that line, it creates two different triangles, referring to the Trinitarians. So we have Borromini, who's embracing math and nature, but also Borromini knows about art history. And so he borrows from art history and does something new with it, which is the most exciting thing to me about Borromini. So one of the most important buildings in architectural history, without a doubt, is the Pantheon in Rome. And we're looking at the dome of the Pantheon in the bottom picture there. And it has a coffered ceiling, and you can see that it has large squares that get smaller as it gets closer. And then there's an oculus, which I talked about earlier, which is basically just a hole in the roof where the sun comes in, and that is actually an open hole. So when it rains in Rome, it rains inside the Pantheon. And the Pantheon was very close to San Carlino. So any student of architecture in Rome would have studied this. The Pantheon was based on the sphere as the embodiment of the heavens. People believed that the earth was surrounded by a celestial sphere. And so it's basically a perfect circle. And perfect circle meant perfection. And the design for the crosses and polygons that make up Borromini's coffered ceiling might have been borrowed from the mausoleum of Santa Costanza, which is less than 2 miles away. So he combined the coffered ceiling of the Pantheon with this intricate design from a Roman mausoleum and made something new with it. But the real sort of icing on the cake for me is how Borromini knew about a lot of different things. He knew mathematicians, he knew scientists, he kept up with a lot of these ideas. And in 1609, Kepler published a book that would have been widely read, and it was about how planets travel in elliptical orbits. Thus, now there is this new shape out there in the heavens besides the circle. Remember, before they thought that it was just a celestial sphere in which all stars and everything just were on. And now they're realizing, first of all, the Earth isn't the center of the universe. It's not even the center of the solar system. That's the sun. And all the planets travel around the sun, not in circular orbits, but elliptical orbits or oval orbits. So what I think he's done is he's taken the language of the Pantheon and its perfection and the spherical idea and said, here's a new perfect shape. This is very similar to the Pantheon. I am using this idea of perfection, but I am using this more dramatic version of a perfect shape. He's helping us see that there's something new out there, and he's making us okay with it. And by it being in a church, there's Galileo, who was persecuted. So there have been people that have tried to say things about how the heavens work, and they were persecuted for it. But Borromini is kind of subtly telling us, look at the universe out there. And he's using this church to tell this story. Now, has this ever been proven? No, but we're kind of detectives in this class. And so we got to try to put pieces together and ask questions like, well, why did he do this? And one reason is the oval is a good shape for the Baroque. It's dramatic. But also, it was his way of showing us how nature and math are perfect partners. All right, thanks for listening to these two 20-minute-ish lectures. And I leave you with this hilarious art history meme.